Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm going to walk you through slow growth in Canada and what needs to happen in terms of both government policies and private sector investment. So, here's a little brief bio about myself. I'm a CPA CGA by trade, so I have 25 years experience. So I know how business development works in terms of growing a business. I also have a solid background in public policy, so I also know how economic policies work. So you're going to hear the term slow growth. I'll talk about that. I'll talk about GDP rates. I'll give you kind of the different scenarios of what's going on in the economy, what needs to be done. So one of the key drivers here quickly is the Liberal government of Canada has announced an economic council that's basically going to provide comments back to the government in terms of policies. Now, anytime you hear these type of councils put together, they're great ideas, but it's what you do with the information after these councils have done their work. And if the government doesn't follow through with some of these policy changes, then it won't have much impact on what's going on in the economy. Measure of any economy is GDP growth. In the particular case of Canada, since 2000, to 2014, their growth numbers have been 2.2%, and if you look at 2015, 2016, we're only 1.1 to 1.2%. We're only projected to be at 2% in 17. So anything below 3% is deemed to be slow growth. And why is that? Well, in the case of Canada, we've got commodity prices very slow for oil mining sectors. That's driving problems. Consumer demand is driven by disposable income. Wage growth, we're seeing that it only runs at about 1.5 to 2.2%. And you're seeing issues with slow worldwide growth. They don't need the export demand. And we have a shift in demographics because you have the baby boomers retiring. This just gives you a quick idea. 30% of the GDP in Canada is goods producing. 75% of the GDP in Canada is service sector. Now, if you look at wages, the good producing sector tends to pay a lot more than overall the service sector. Now, there'll be key areas in the service sector, from professional jobs to some of the government jobs, that will pay a decent income that's equivalent to the goods producing sector. What types of business are you going to see in the future quickly? Well, 3D printing's growing. Energy storage, as we look more and ways to leverage wind power, solar, methane, or different hydropowers. Expert farming, how do we get more use of the land? Microgrids, these are like little cluster zones in terms of generating power. Prefab homes, so they're building a lot of the framing, and then that way they can put up houses quicker. Drones, they're looking at using drones for more on distribution side. Driverless cars is coming into play. E-commerce is out there, but it's becoming more and more of an expansion. E-commerce, especially in Canada's case. How do you do things going forward? Well, with innovation, you have to cultivate it. You have to look at ways you do this, from innovation centers to tax programs to existing funds to basically partnering with all levels of government and the private sector. So those are critical areas of taking ideas from incubation to market. And it's very critical as a government that you look at the best ways to use limited funds and get them using properly. Revamping the education system, so we make sure that we align the education systems with the skills of business today and also in tomorrow. We also look at tax policies on the hiring credit side as well. Exports, very critical, but what drives exports is capacity. And part of capacity is business investment, that's foreign direct investment, but also what drives exports too is the ability to get goods to market. If we could get exports up by another 125 billion, that could create well over 600,000 good paying jobs. What needs to happen? Again, like when we start talking about exports, key investments in terms of infrastructure, trade agreements, and investment protection acts that allow you better, fair trade deals that you need to negotiate, cutting red tape so that you can get plants, mines, energy projects off the ground, even including pipelines. Also, provincial policies need to be curtailed, whether that's carbon tax, base hydros, reducing regulations at the provincial level. It doesn't mean you harm the environment, but you need to be pick and choosy about how you manage red tape. Retail sales are another key thing of the economy. Two-thirds of GDP growth is really determined by consumer spending. So what you have to do is look at ways to better utilize things, and that really comes into the taxation influence and the duties and tariffs. Any sort of new taxes like carbon taxes, CPP hikes, or even hydro rates, they work their ways through the pricing of the consumer prices, and those stuff needs to be considered as well. What can be done? Well, you need to reduce tariffs. You shouldn't be trying to increase consumption taxes any more than you have to. Towing the line how you do payroll tax increases. Capping growth in hydro rates because they influence business. Reducing red tape and regulations, and promote local buying to support local businesses. Housing market's another critical area. It's growing at 8%, almost 4 or 5 times GDP growth. Wages are not even keeping pace to inflation, so that's a critical area. But real estate can't be just fixed by a federal policy. It has to involve provincial, municipal, even the private sector need to be involved with it, and that's what you're seeing here with the housing prices in general. What does government need to do? Well, government needs to get its house in order. That means from its spending and its deficit targets, it needs to achieve it. It also needs to look at ways to better deliver revenue in terms of value for money, and that's something that needs to be emphasized. You can't be the end all and be all for everybody. You need to pick your spots. Why is it critical for the government to get their finances in play? Because when business looks at a country, they look at stability of it, not just in the government but the tax base. If I know a government's got high deficit and high debt, there's potential that they're going to basically increase my costs down there. Also too, if I know I'm heavily burdened with regulation and red tape, then I may look elsewhere in terms of my investment. In summary, economic councils are good ideas. I never stray against that. Any sort of project work I've done in the past is good, but what you come out of it is what you have to kind of look forward that can be plausible, that can build a solution. Second thing, there is no easy solution for slow growth. There's multiple facets in play, therefore it'll take multiple things to improve it, and it's not going to be one policy that drives growth. So that when you hear things and all this, when people talk about it, it has to be a very tactical approach, and it has to make sense folks on the 1, 3, 5, and 10-year period, right? So it's something to bear in mind. Government also has a role to play in here, and it's one of the things that becoming into play is some of these provinces are looking at increasing their revenue. Well, that's actually a bad thing to do at times, because most cases governments don't necessarily have a revenue problem, they have an expense problem. So increasing revenue doesn't grow an economy. All it does is take money out of circulation. If business is going to have more costs, they're just going to pass it on to their consumers. Have less disposable income, they're not buying things in retail sales. So these things are what you need to bear in mind as you're looking at the rhetoric going back and forth on economic slope trends, including the growth phase we're going through. Is if you're going to get up to 3 to 4% growth, then there has to be an emphasis on 3 pillars here. It has to be an emphasis on exports, has to be an emphasis on retail sales, it has to be an emphasis on infrastructure, has to be an emphasis on housing. You get it under control, and if you do all those things and kind of manage the stuff and the cost, and you have economic growth where you're creating jobs and good paying jobs, then you have the ability to provide basically more revenue if you've got stronger economic growth. And that's something to bear in mind when you're starting to hear discussions with government. Thank you.